download our Revise It Right revision app for hundreds of videos, quizzes, exam questions, tutor support and so much more. This video is about the reactivity of metals. Now, the reactivity series orders metals in terms of their reactivity. And the reactivity series, which is down here, you need to learn its order. Now, the most reactive metals you find at the top, so therefore potassium is the most reactive metal. And they, as you go down, they become less reactive. Now, carbon is included, you will see more of later, is because we can use carbon to extract metals from the ores if the metal is less reactive than carbon, and we will get to that later. So looking at this reactivity series, it means that potassium is more reactive than magnesium, for example, because it is higher up. Similarly, copper is less reactive than zinc because it is lower down. Remember, for a metal, its reactivity depends on how quickly it loses electrons. The metals that lose electrons the easiest are the most reactive. And we covered this when we went on to, when we looked at group 1 of the periodic table. And therefore, that tells you that potassium on this particular list loses its electrons more readily and more easily, and therefore it is the most reactive. You also, of course, need to remember that when metals react, it forms a positive ion, and that is because it loses an electron. So the metals, potassium, sodium, lithium, calcium, magnesium, zinc, iron and copper can be put in order of their activity from their reactions with water and dilute acids. So, for example, if you didn't know the reactivity series, you could distinguish and determine the reactivity series based on how they react with water and how they react with acids. Remember, first of all, that when an acid and a metal react, it forms a salt. So an acid plus a metal, it forms salt and hydrogen. And you'll remember this from our acids in reactions lesson. The more reactive the metal, the faster that this reaction will go, and therefore the more bubbles will be given off. Therefore, potassium will be much faster and more rigorous, and it will produce more bubbles. So, for example, if we had two things, let's say two beakers, and we had a metal which was here, and a metal which was here, and we said that this was magnesium, and we said that this was potassium, and then we added acid, we could tell which one was more reactive by how vigorous the reaction was and how many more bubbles. So we know that obviously potassium is more reactive, so it's going to be more vigorous, it's going to give more bubbles than magnesium. And therefore you can use an acid plus a metal to determine how reactive something is. So if you had an unknown metal, you could place it into acid and compare its reactivity to another metal. Remember to download our Revise It Right revision app, watch over 700 videos, answer 4,000 plus quiz questions, over 1,000 flashcards, 1,000 exam questions, worksheets, forums, and get help from qualified teachers and so much more. The link is in the description. Now, you can also use how a metal reacts with water to suggest how reactive it is. Now, you'll remember that when we add a metal and water, we produce a metal hydroxide plus hydrogen. And again, how quickly this reaction occurs tells you how reactive a metal is. The reactions that are more vigorous, produce more bubbles and happen quicker, show that the metal is much more reactive. And we can use a very similar technique to what we just used. If we have a metal, again, for example, we'll use magnesium and we'll use potassium, and we add it to water. And the quicker reaction, and the one that produces more bubbles and the one that's more vigorous, shows you that that metal is more reactive. So the point of that is to understand that we can use both acids and water to tell us how reactive a metal is because of how quickly the reaction occurs and how many bubbles are given off. So here we have some summary questions. Pause the video to have a go. Okay, question 1. What is more reactive, potassium or sodium? Potassium is more reactive. What's more reactive, calcium or tin? Calcium. Lithium or calcium? Lithium. And then we've got to recall the reactivity series. So we've got potassium. Let's do the symbols. Potassium, sodium, lithium, calcium, magnesium, then carbon, then we got zinc, iron and copper. So that's the order there. What is produced when a metal and an acid react? Well, a metal plus an acid produces a salt plus hydrogen. And how can we use this reaction to tell us the reactivity of metals? Well, the more vigorous the reaction, the quicker it happens, and the more bubbles given off, the more reactive the metal. And what is produced when a metal and water react? Well, they produce metal hydroxide plus hydrogen. So metal plus water produces metal hydroxide plus hydrogen. So we've now looked at the reactivity of metals. There are plenty of practice questions on the website, and as ever, if there's anything you didn't understand, get in contact with a tutor who will happily help.